time with the honourable member for the Bay of Quinte, which would probably be sometime after 3 o'clock today before he gets his chance. I've been looking forward to the opportunity to speak on Budget 2017 because it marks a remarkable new step forward in a lot of communities across Canada, including ours in Fleetwood, Port Kells, my city of Surrey, and in Metro Vancouver. And in fact, given our region's role as Canada's Western gateway for billions of dollars in trade every year, the investment our government is making at home for me is going to have positive ripple effects at home for every member in this House. The highlights for our home riding from Budget 2017 are considerable. Our $20.1 billion commitment over 11 years to improve public transit across Canada will deliver a 40% share of the cost of 3 key rapid transit lines in Metro Vancouver. One is the SkyTrain extension along Vancouver's Broadway corridor to serve what's now North America's busiest bus route. The other 2 rapid transit lines Budget 2017 will support are in Surrey. Our Regional Growth Management Plan says we'll be home to a good percentage of the 1.2 million new residents expected to arrive in Metro Vancouver by 2041. So better mobility is going to be really important. Plans are for our Fleetwood neighbourhood to have 3 stations along the Fraser Highway at 152nd, 160th and 166th, and perhaps even 2 more, one at 148th and the other at 156th. And the revitalization that will take place along the new line, and we've seen this sort of thing happen in the Canby corridor, along the Millennium line, etc. We expect this revitalization to truly reshape Fleetwood and bring to reality the hard work of many visionaries over the years, including, especially, our friend, the late Rick Hart. Budget 2017 will also make a huge difference in the lives of many Surrey families, particularly those people who've come to Canada with the professional skills we urgently need, but who face barriers because their credentials aren't recognized here. Every day, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, or an engineer is underemployed. They lose, their families lose, and we lose. Budget 2017 will invest $27.5 million over 5 years, starting this year, to remove those barriers. We'll start the process even before the professionals arrive. And once they're here, we'll support their efforts to get Canadian accreditation with a loans program to help cover the costs. And finally, a targeted employment strategy will help them get that essential Canadian work experience so they can relaunch their careers. There are 3 more highlights from Budget 2017 I'd like to mention. I think we can get them in quickly here, Mr. Speaker. Each will make a difference in communities across Canada, including mine. As we all know, housing prices in Metro Vancouver, Toronto, and other cities have pushed home ownership out of reach for far too many families. Our decision to get the federal government back into a national housing strategy responds to the calls for help from the provinces, the municipalities, and neighbourhoods. In Surrey, the Guildford neighbourhood that I share with my colleague, the honourable member for Surrey Centre, is where you'll find our city's main stock of affordable housing. Budget 2017 will provide $11.2 billion over 11 years across Canada to design, build, renew and repair the homes for millions of Canadians working hard to join the middle class. Another $5 billion national housing fund will better support vulnerable Canadians, the elderly, our disabled, women seeking refuge from abuse. Housing costs are a major source of worry and insecurity in many cities across Canada. Our government listened. We heard this, and we made affordable housing a priority. Another acutely urgent issue in Metro Vancouver is the opioid crisis. No community or neighbourhood is immune from the tragedy of overdose deaths or the gang-related violence that accompanies the drug trade. In February, our government provided $10 million in emergency support to help British Columbia respond to the crisis. Illicit drugs took 914 lives last year alone, and over 320 more in just the first 3 months of this year. This funding builds on the $65 million over 5 years we also announced in February for a strategy toward an opioid action plan. Budget 2017 enhances that with a further $22.7 million over 5 years. Mr. Speaker, this budget builds on scores of other initiatives that matter a great deal in Fleetwood, Port Kells, and in every community across the country. Important measures, like the new Canada Caregiver Credit, that will help those needing care and the families who provide that care. Improvements to our family reunification program are helping families reunite more quickly, something that matters a lot in many homes in Fleetwood Port Kells. And we can't underestimate the impact of the first full year of the Canada Child Benefit. Over $22 billion in tax-free support for the families that need it most, putting money on kitchen tables in Fleetwood Port Kells and across Canada, lifting over 300,000 children out of poverty. And depending on the multiplier you use, sparking over $200 billion in economic activity. I think at this point, with your permission, sir, I'll leave it there. We'll pick it up.
Yes, we'll break now for a statement by members. The honourable member will have 4 minutes and 30 seconds when we return on this topic.
Port Kells has 4.5 minutes left in his speech, I believe. Right. Honourable member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those who may remember, we were talking about the budget and some significant investments that the federal government has been making to move a number of very important things forward. And it all contributes to economic activity. But I think it's important to realize that what the government has been doing so far, Budget 2016 and Budget 2017, is more than a stimulus program. The investments we're making in infrastructure, jobs training, innovation, early learning, and childcare are all about building a solid foundation for a prosperous economy, one that offers a fair share and a fair shake to all Canadians willing to step forward and invest some hope and hard work for a real change in their lives. Listening to Canadians and evidence-based decision-making are blazing a new path for the country in a fairly uncertain world right now. This recognizes that while the previous government's ideology may have been well-intentioned, it simply didn't deliver the results the majority of Canadians wanted. And speaking of results, I wanted to save some time, Mr. Speaker, to talk about the issue of deficits, because they keep coming up. The previous government sought to balance their last budget at all costs. This after racking up over $150 billion in accumulated deficits over 10 years. But what a cost it was, Mr. Speaker. If they did indeed balance the budget, it was thanks in part to service cuts and lapsed funding that fluffed up the bottom line as ministries and programs didn't actually spend the money the Conservatives committed. A balanced budget at all costs, but who paid? Well, our veterans certainly did when frontline staff was cut back and service offices were closed. So did unemployed young people and our disabled Canadians when tens of millions of dollars in promised funding went unspent. So did Albertans when Mr. Harper's government had no response for them in 2014 and 2015 as falling oil prices foretold the tough times ahead. All Canadian taxpayers certainly did when over 60 of the Canada Revenue Agency's most senior auditors were let go to cut costs. And they're the ones who could have tracked down many millions in taxes that were avoided by wealthy families. They may now, in fact, be helping even more wealthy families avoid paying their fair share of taxes. The Conservatives believe so much in the virtue of a balanced budget at all cost. They tried to close the gap for 2015-2016 with the fire sale disposal of the General Motors shares they purchased during the economic collapse of 2007-2008. The Globe and Mail reported that this badly timed sale, done to balance the budget, resulted in as much as a $3.5 billion loss off the original purchase price. So all Canadians took it in the neck for that one. And as I mentioned, lapsed funding, the underspending of government budget commitments, also padded the Tories' bottom line. Now, of course, every government every year sees lapsed funding, but as the Canadian press reported in December 2014, the Conservatives gamed the system deliberately with rewards for managers who underspent their budgets. So the balanced budget bragging rights the previous government pursued at all cost was the old bait and switch, carnival sideshow or a shell game. To be sure, as we look at Budget 2017 and the critically important work it does to build on Budget 2016, there are financial deficits. But Canadians understood during the last election campaign that those investments were just that. The deficits would lead to something that this country sorely needed. And they can see today that there are dividends of many kinds being delivered. And I think it occurs to people when you think about it that there's more than one kind of deficit. There were times in the decade prior to Budget 2016 that Canada experienced many deficits. Deficits in dollars, to be sure, but also deficits of compassion, of imagination, of vision, and optimism. Budget 2017 is delivering a surplus on all of those accounts, the kind that Canadians are supporting, that will have the equity, the economy, and the future that will ultimately deliver the kind of genuinely balanced budget we haven't seen since the days of Chrétien and Martin. Mr. Speaker, I was a teenager when Canada celebrated its centennial, and I remember with great fondness the incredible energy, enthusiasm, and pride that swept from coast to coast to coast. We owe it to today's teenagers, to everybody in fact, to recreate that experience. And what a better time than now, our 150th birthday, and what a better way than with the direction and future laid out for our country in the federal budget before us today. Thank you, sir.